So this is my connection to a past and a present of San Francisco, a past that happened over 130 years ago, and a present, well, it goes on every day. You see, 130 years ago, San Francisco burned for 3 days, and because of that, there is an ingenious system beneath the streets of San Francisco, a system that when the next earthquake comes is going to be really, really critical to saving San Francisco. Now, if you stick around till the end, I'm going to show you a couple of things you probably didn't know about this helmet.
But let's talk for a second more about the 1906 earthquake, because as earthquakes go, it was a frickin' big one. 8.3 on the magnitude scale. It went on for 45 seconds. It ruptured about 300 miles of the Earth's crust, and the Earth moved 16 feet. And to give that a little bit of context, I was in the World Series earthquake, the 1989 Loma Prieta quake. That quake went on for 15 seconds and registered 7.1 on the magnitude scale, which is a heck of a lot less. Well, how devastating was that 1906 quake? Well, if we look at it in terms of how many people were left homeless, okay? 3/4 of the people in San Francisco during that earthquake, they lost their homes. In fact, so many people lost their homes that there were tent cities, probably behind me in Washington Square, definitely in Golden Gate Park. If the shaker was the first punch, the second punch was the fire. The fire was freaking enormous. It raged for 3 days. It consumed 500 city blocks. I mean, we know the earthquake brought San Francisco to its knees, but what happened with the fire? Why did it spread so quickly? And the first thing that happened is the chief of the San Francisco Fire Department, Chief Sullivan, well, he was killed in the shaker. So right off the bat, people who were in charge of kind of strategizing and how to go about fighting this fire, they lost their leader. Then we can talk about the firehouses, which were mostly masonry and mostly kind of fell down and were destroyed. And then there were the gas lines that were underground and that went all over the city. Well, with a quake of that size and that much shaking, those gas lines, they were ruptured, and there was natural gas everywhere. And finally, there was the water, or the lack of water, that the firemen who were available had to fight the fires. Because of the shaking, like the gas lines, the water mains that supplied the hydrants, well, they were broken. When you combine all of these different things into this particular situation, that fire, well, it was out of control. Finally, the fire department called out the Army to help fight the fires, and it was the combined effort of the Army and the fire department and others who were ultimately able to kind of get this fire under control. I know I'm a nerd, and I know I like things like this, but I wouldn't have known about cisterns unless my dad told me. And my dad was a San Francisco firefighter. And one day I was in the car with him and he's like, "Hey, you know what that brick circle is?" I'm like, "Well, no, Dad, I was a little kid. I didn't know." And he pulled the car over and he told me all about it. Now, he didn't nerd out like I did about how many there are and how many gallons because he was a fireman and he just knew that if he needed water in an emergency and the pipes were broken, he knew where to get it. And so to him, they were just there. And anytime the city needed to call on them, they were going to be there. So this cistern here, this cistern is the 1908 variety. It holds 75,000 gallons of water. There are upwards of 170 of these around San Francisco. And stating the obvious here, of course, this is water storage that they keep filled up in case there is another shaker and the water mains break. This gives them a backup system where they can pull a fire truck up here, an engine that has a pump in it, drop a suction hose down there and run it through the pumper and spray and put out the fire. The fire devastated such a huge area. The city fathers decided, and there were no city mothers at that time, that was a long time ago, the city fathers decided they needed a strategy to put in place to kind of combat this when it happened again in the future, and it will happen. So what they did is they built cisterns, underground water storage, and they built over 170 of them, and most of the new ones, the ones built in after 1908, they hold 75,000 gallons of water. And all told, within the system, it's upwards of 11 million gallons of water that is stored and on hand in case it's needed. The largest cistern, well, it's under City Hall, and it holds, I think, 243,000 gallons because, you know, you gotta protect those politicians. Taking a chance standing in the middle of the intersection, but right below my feet is one of the oldest cisterns in San Francisco. I'm at Montgomery and Pacific. We're gonna take a walk down Montgomery, and we're gonna see if we can't find a few more cisterns. All right, well, I got the light. If you notice, you can see all around me is this square brick here. And this is one of the older cisterns. I got cars coming right by me. Here is the entry. We were just up the street that way, and I'm guessing, I have a map, I'm not guessing, we're gonna head down that way, and there's going to be more of them. Before I get hit, I should probably get out of the road. So I find this just totally fascinating that in 1851, Montgomery Street here, this was the waterfront. Right here, that was the beach, and there were all kinds of ships. Now, this is where kind of development started, which when you think about it, it makes perfect sense that they have these cisterns lined up and down Montgomery Street. Number 3. This is the last of them along the line. I'm here on California and Montgomery Street. The cable cars run right by here. This particular cistern has been here for well over 150 years. And it kind of blows my mind to think that it's just sitting here waiting to be called on.
Now, in addition to the cisterns, in 1913, San Francisco put in something that they call the AWSS, Auxiliary Water Supply System. And this is a series of high-pressure pipes, and they're built pretty beefy to hopefully withstand an earthquake. They are throughout San Francisco in the highly populated areas, Chinatown, Financial District, where fires could spread really rapidly, and probably areas that were highly populated in 1913. The cool thing about that system is it can actually draw seawater into it as well as fresh water. It was really instrumental in helping control the fires in the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake. The Marina District in San Francisco sustained a lot of damage, and there was broken water pipes and gas lines, and they drew on the AWSS to help put those fires out. So this thing, I think you all know that the back of this, the long tail, is to keep the debris from going down into their turnout coat, hot embers and whatnot. My dad told me they would sometimes wear it this way, with this out in front of them, because when they were pulling down ceilings, they wanted this to catch the debris. The other thing about this particular style of helmet, as opposed to the ones that you see some fire departments wear where their faces and their heads are enclosed, in San Francisco, the firefighters did not want that. And my dad told me it was because it covered up their ears. And their ears are the things that really help them sense temperature when it gets really, really hot and dangerous. And if you think about it, they're in a lot of firefighting clothing and equipment, and there isn't a lot of skin out there. So they really like these particular helmets because these things can feel. The cisterns and the AWSS system, the things that they have in place to protect San Francisco from fire, it really is a result of what they learned in the past. And hopefully it doesn't happen in my lifetime, but I'm pretty sure there's going to be another major earthquake in California and in San Francisco. And hopefully these systems do what they're designed to do and save San Francisco from repeating the past of 1906.
I worked in a television studio. San Francisco City. Side note about 1989, I worked in a television studio at the time, and when the ground started shaking, I ran for a doorway like I was taught. Well, my studio mate, Armando, who was from Venezuela, he took off outside. And when it was all over and he came back in, I'm like, dude, you're supposed to get under a doorway and ride out the quake. He said, hey, Nick, where I'm from, when we get an earthquake like that, buildings fall down, so I run outside.